I'm Peter Endres, head baker of Runner and Stone, and I'm here to show you how to shape every bread. It's a really common shape. You're going to see it in every bakery. Boule means ball in French. The first step of this is going to be pulling all the sides of the dough in towards the center, kind of creating like a little package or a little dumpling shape there. We're going to flip that over. I'm not going to flour the board too much because I do want the dough to stick to the board a little bit, and you'll see why. I'm going to push the dough in one direction. That's going to create some tension in this direction. And so the gluten is what we're working with now. As I push this dough, we're trying to stretch the dough in this direction. I'm going to push that in all different angles. We want to keep doing this motion, pulling the bread till we have a nice smooth surface on the top of that boule. So we're going to go ahead and proof this on this proofing board. We have our boule that has proofed for about 2 to 3 hours. So a good way to check if your bread is ready to bake, if its final fermentation is complete, is to just give it a poke. So we want that indent to stay a little bit. If it was springing back entirely and erase the indent you made, it might need a little more time. To score breads in a professional kitchen, we'll use what we call a lame. It's basically going to hold a razor blade. I'm going to put this razor blade on the lame here. What we're going to do is a box score. So we're going to score around the edges of this bread, and that's going to allow this bread to open laterally. One key thing with this, and you can see it here, you want to make sure that those two cuts connect. If not, this little bridge of dough is going to pinch that dough together as it bakes in the oven. The bread's going to bake out like this instead of baking in a nice round, which is what we're intending for it. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that those two cross over. To finish it, I'm also going to just put a little decorative mark here. Here we have our final baked boule. A great way to test if breads are done is right when they come out of the oven. You could turn them over, just do a real quick tap on the bottom. So it has a nice hollow drum sound to it, tells me that it was baked correctly. So the interior of this bread is going to be a little bit tighter than some of the other shapes that we'll see, both because of the shape and because of the dough. We're going to be using a brioche dough for this. So we're going to take a 100-gram piece of dough here. We're going to pull all the edges towards the center, making like a little dumpling shape. Flip that over. And then just as we did with the boule, where we're going to be drawing the sides in towards the bottom of the dough to build some round surface tension, we're going to be doing that but with our hand. So we're going to push the dough towards the table. We're going to push the dough towards the table in all different directions. And while we're doing it, we're kind of using this whole surface of our hand to move the dough in that circular motion. If you wanted more of a hamburger bun shape, you're going to flatten that dough a little bit. So just going to push it down so that when it proofs, it doesn't turn into like a ball shape, but more of that classic hamburger bun shape. And then this we're going to set to proof on a piece of parchment paper. This is our final roll. Once it was about double its original size when we shaped it, we gave it an egg wash. So let's cut this open. We'll see what the interior. For a brioche dough like this, you're generally going to have a nice even crumb is what you're looking for. It's going to be nice and soft. So chapeau means hat in French. It's literally going to be a little roll with a tiny little dough hat on top of it. So we're going to start by shaping the roll pretty similar to any roll. We're going to be pulling the sides in, flip that over. I'm pushing the dough into the board so that it draws towards the center. And then we're going to take a piece of the same dough and we're going to roll that out. So I pre-rolled out a piece here. We're going to flour this liberally because we don't want this to stick to our roll. We want this to stay clear of our roll so that it bakes up and forms like a little cracker on top of the roll. We're going to cut a little disc there, and then I'm going to flip this over. So this is the top surface of our roll. Ultimately, it's going to be the top surface. There's a little belly button that we have on the bottom of the dough, and we're going to push my finger really right down to the board. So what that does is lock that cap right on top of the roll, and then we'll fold that over. This is the final shape. Here's our final chapeau roll. You can see that the roll underneath proofed up, but the top part kind of stays as a cracker. When it bakes, the cracker actually peels away from the bread a little bit. So you wind up having two textures in one roll. It's going to be essentially round brioche shape again. And the difference this time is going to be how we proof the dough. So after we have our round shape, nice surface tension built on that, We're gonna put it on the tray with the others. This is gonna be nice because the Parker House rolls, when they proof, they're gonna proof upwards, and it gives you a much different texture than a regular brioche roll would have. So here's our final Parker House rolls out of the oven. These were egg washed before going in, and then you can see that they really proofed all together. So they have a really great interior, really nice texture. They stay fresh for a good amount of time because of the height on them, and they're really delicious bread. Yum. Brioche à tête literally means brioche with a head, and that is what it winds up being. This bread has a pre-shape, so we're gonna do a round pre-shape. Pre-shape is gonna be an intermediate shape between the cut dough and the final shape. So once we have this in a round, we're gonna let this rest for 15-20 minutes, just set this aside, and then we're gonna carry on to the final shape. It's nice, you can see that it's loosened up a little bit. We're gonna do the final shape with this. So I'm gonna take a little bit of flour. I'm gonna turn this roll on its side, and I'm gonna roll it with my finger here to kind of get like a bowling pin. So I have a little top knot here. I'm gonna take this top knot and I'm gonna push it down into the dough. So that's the first stage. And then we're just gonna make sure that that little head part, so this would be the head, the tête in the brioche à tête, is gonna lock in there. I'm gonna use my fingers and just push right down to the wood board here to really lock that dough in there. The characteristic mold for this brioche à tête is often a fluted tart mold like this. We're gonna oil it. So we put a little bit of oil in there. Just brush that up. And then we're gonna go ahead and place the final shape in the tart mold. Okay, here we have our final brioche à tête. You can tell by the fact that the head is still on it that we proofed it the correct amount of time. Right before the bake, I brushed it with a little bit of egg wash and finished it with pearl sugar, which is pretty typical for this shape. So we're gonna unmold this, and I can cut this in half, show you what the interior is like. This again is a brioche dough, so it should have a nice even crumb, nice even interior. It's nice and soft and airy. Next, we're going to be shaping the baguette, which is kind of like the holy grail of French breads. Everyone knows it. If I go to a French bakery, it's going to be the bread that I'm going to try first to decide if I'm going to try anything else at that bakery. Up till now, we've been doing exclusively round shapes. So this is going to have a different pre-shape and then also a different final shape, which is going to lead us to what you know to be the baguette shape. Pre-shape is going to be a little like a small football shape, and it's going to be an intermediate shape between this piece of dough and the ultimate baguette shape. So while we're pre-shaping, what I'm doing is building some tension in this direction, which is going to be important to help our baguette hold up both in the final proof and in the oven. And I'm also kind of extending it a little bit. So basically an intermediate between that piece of dough and what will be the baguette dough. All right, so my baguette pre-shapes have rested for about 15 to 20 minutes. We're gonna go into the final shape. First thing I'm gonna do is flip it over. So after I did the pre-shape, there was a bit of a seam on the bottom. I'm gonna flip that over so that the seam is on top now. I'm gonna give that a light stretch. The first step in the baguette shaping is gonna be to fold the top down. Folding this down and pushing back against the dough. Next step is gonna be imagining a line right here. I'm gonna bring that line to the edge and form a seam. So I'm catching it with the heel of my hand, pulling it down, and that is, again, giving that final burst of tension along the cross section of the baguette and bringing it closer to that final baguette shape. The last thing we're gonna do is extend it out. Here's where the extensibility of the dough is important. So we're gonna cross our hands over and we're gonna just bring that dough out to the length that we want. On the end, I'm gonna taper it. So just push down a little bit on the board, and that's basically our shape. So after we're done elongating it, we're gonna have a seam on the bottom. We're gonna put that seam in some flour, and then we're gonna bring our couche up. It's a linen cloth that we proof bread on. So it's pretty well tempered with flour, so nothing really sticks to it. And then as you'll see, we'll put that baguette shape there, seam side down, and we'll use the couche to actually support it into its baguette shape. So this you can continue to shape, put multiple baguettes in here. This has rested for about 20 minutes, ready to go in the oven. We want to score along the center line of the baguette so that this bread is going to open this way and have like a nice oval cross section. We're going to do 5 cuts on this. So I'm going to imagine the middle cut is going to be right here, the third cut. So I'm going to go ahead and just start the cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so here we have our 2 final baked baguettes. You can see they have a nice golden brown crispy crust on them. You see the results of our 5 scores here. When we scored them along the center line of the baguette. You can see now how those scores have opened as a result of both our good shaping and some good fermentation in that dough. Really great characteristic of the baguette and a sign of some good shaping is when you get a little bit of ridge here, what we would call the ears of the baguette. So we're going to go ahead and cut these open. This is a great crumb for a baguette. What you're looking for is nice open hole structure. There's a little bit of regularity to it, but for the most part it's through the entire cross section of the baguette, and I would love to eat some. Nice, perfect. The epi comes from the final baguette shape. So this is our final baguette shape. We've already been through the pre-shape on this. It's relaxed, it's proofed for about 20 minutes, and it's ready to be baked. So right before the bake, we're going to cut this baguette shape into the epi shape. Epi is French for shaft, as in a shaft of wheat. So the final shape on this ultimately should look like a shaft of wheat. So we're just using our scissors at an angle, being sure not to cut all the way through the bread, so there's still a little bit of a connection here so that that stays together in the final bake. And then this is ready to go in the oven. You can see that the bread opens where we cut it a little bit, which preserves the open interior that a baguette would have. The end result is that it's kind of a series of pull-apart rolls. Batard in French actually means bastard, and so it was said that this was kind of between a boule and a baguette, so it was like a bastard of a shape between those 2 shapes. So we're going to do a round pre-shape on this. Again, we don't want this. This is just a pre-shape, so we don't need it to be really tight. So we're going to set this aside, let this rest. So we have the pre-shape here. The seam, so to speak, is on the bottom at this point. I'm going to flip that over on a lightly floured surface. We're going to fold down the top, similar to the baguette shape, push back a little bit. We're building strength in this direction again to give that batard the height and lift it needs in the oven. As a final step for this, we're going to seal it closed. And similar to the baguette shape, which was just sealed in one direction, this is going to be sealed all towards the center so that it gives you that football shape that's classic for a batard. So I'm going to start on one end, I'm going to draw that down and seal it. And sealing all towards the center point here. So you can see already that that has like a half moon shape to it. We're going to bring that forward and just give it a little bit of a roll to bring those edges out. We have a seam here. The seam's going to go on the bottom as that proofs. And then right before baking, we're going to score this as well. So a good typical score that you see a lot is right down the center line, 2 cuts. And that's going to allow the bread to open again. So here is the final baked batard. You can see the 2 scores that I did. So we're going to go ahead and cut this open, check out the interior. There you go. You can see we have decently open, similar to the boule. This will be a great general all-purpose loaf. So we did a round pre-shape on this earlier. We're going to be shaping this round pre-shape into a batard shape. This is essentially a second pre-shape. So we're going to do the batard shaping again, folding that all over towards the center. We're going to let this batard sit in this shape for about 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to get a rolling pin and do the final shape of the fondue. We're going to put a pretty good amount of flour on the board for this one. I'm going to roll the bread in the flour. I'm going to use the rolling pin to pleat the center of it. I'm going really firmly on this right down to the board. And that's going to really lock that center dough together and essentially change the shape of the dough. We're going to pinch the sides together, and then this gives us our final fondue shape. All right, here we have our final fondue shape out of the oven. So you can kind of see the way that that center pleat expressed itself in the bake. It holds down the bread and gives you 2 pieces that have some good volume to them, similar to a baguette that was unscored. It adds a little variation to the look of the final shape, and it's pretty attractive. Right, so we're going to be making a few braided loaves here. We're going to be doing a single strand, a 3-strand, and a 6-strand braided loaf. We're using a brioche dough here, an enriched dough. So we're going to start with a rectangular pre-shape. So I'm going to pull the dough down so that the rope will have some structure to it. We're going to do a series of those to get all of our pre-shapes ready. All right, so we let our strands rest. So now I'm going to get them into their final pre-shape for the braid. So I'm just going to elongate them a little bit more and taper the ends. So now we have all our strands ready for our 6-3 and our single strand loaf. So we're going to go ahead and start with our single strand braid, which is essentially a form of a knot that we're going to make with one strand. So we're going to carry that over about in thirds, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. We're going to thread this one through. We're going to twist that and pull that end right through there. Gives you like a nice little knot shape. We're going to move into our 3-strand braid. So we're going to first start by kind of putting those 3 strands together. And then we're going to do a typical braid here. So just one over the other. Not pulling too tight, we don't want too much tension, we might start to rip the dough. And then when we get to the end, we're going to pinch those ends together. Same thing here, we're going to pinch those ends together. And then what I like to do to clean this up is flip it over. You could bring all those tips, just pinch them in a little bit on the bottom. And then when you turn the dough over, you have a nice clean 3-strand braid. Now for the 6-strand braid. This one, we are going to bring them all together like we did with the 3-strand. We're going to pinch the tips together. We're going to pull one up and over. And then I'm going to pull this first strand over here. Bring this one down with this group. Don't worry about this part here, we'll clean that up at the end. Pull this one across, keeping these in 2 separate segments here. And then pull this down, pull across and down. Across and down. You see I'm doing it pretty loose too again so we don't have any tearing. Across and down, across. Ken, when you get to the end, you're gonna just pinch together the end pieces here like we did with the other braid. Pinch them together. Again, we're gonna flip that over, bring the pieces up, pinch them on the bottom to hide all our straggly ends there. Give that a nice roll, and then we have a 6-stranded braid. Here are our final baked loaves. You can see kind of how forgiving they are, and they wind up looking pretty nice, even if your braiding's not perfect. I finished the single and the 3-strand with some egg wash and pearl sugar, and the 6-strand has just some egg wash on it. This again was made with a brioche dough, so nice even crumb, and would be a perfect vehicle for some butter and some jam, or to just rip off and eat. Does the trick. We're going to be shaping the Kaiser roll from a semolina dough. Gives it a little more extensibility, which will be great for this shape because it's pretty intense. So we're going to start with the piece of dough and give it a rectangular pre-shape. And then that's our first pre-shape. So we're going to let this rest, and then I'll show you how to knot the Kaiser roll. Rectangular pre-shape for our Kaiser roll has rested. It's going to allow me to extend it a little bit more. We're going to give ourselves pretty good rope here, and then we're essentially going to tie this into a knot, but it's going to be key that we go through on both ends of this knot. And then we're going to connect the ends, give them a little pinch, flip that over, gives you that classic Kaiser star on the front of it. We could also finish this with poppy seed is a really nice option for this. So just put a little bit of water on that, dip that right into the seeds, and then we're going to set this on a pan, and that's going to proof. Here we have our final baked Kaiser roll with poppy seeds on it. You could see how what was originally a knot shape kind of proofed together and gave us that nice characteristic star shape on top of the roll. This has a great interior. You can see a little evidence of the shaping, but for the most part, this proofed together. Go ahead and give this a try. Delicious. Very mild bread, nice thin crust, just missing a fried egg. All right, next we're going to be shaping an iconic New York bread, the bagel. I'm using a semolina dough here for ease of extensibility. So we did a rectangular pre-shape on this earlier. We're gonna extend this out, connect the ends, and then we're gonna roll those ends together to form that classic ring shape. And there's your bagel. After this final shape, it's gonna proof for a little bit. This shape then gets boiled, typically in some water with a little bit of malt syrup in it, and then it gets put into an oven and baked. Okay, here we have our final boiled and baked bagel. You see a pretty typical tight crumb, nice chewy interior, and a light crisp on the outside, which comes from that boil, and then the final bake. Pretzel has two pre-shapes. So it starts with a round pre-shape, and then we're gonna go into a second pre-shape, which is a rectangular pre-shape. And so we're going to fold that down, and then I'm gonna elongate it just to start it on that shape towards pretzel. And now we're gonna let this pre-shape rest for another 20 minutes. All right, now we have the final shape. We're going to roll it out to give it a little bit more length and get it closer to the strand length that we need for the pretzel. And we're gonna take these two arms here, cross them over twice, and then flip them into the center, connect them to the body of the dough here. They usually get a score across the bottom here, and there you have your classic pretzel shape. All right, here we have our final baked pretzel. So this pretzel rested in the refrigerator for 20 to 30 minutes. Once it's firmed up, it gets dipped in a solution of lye, and then it gets baked till it's got a nice golden brown color. Pretty typical bread shape. The Pullman is a reference to a Pullman railroad car, a box car. It's where it got its shape from, if you imagine wheels down here. So a rectangular bread is going to be dictated by the dimensions of the pan, essentially. So for the rectangular pre-shape, just going to fold this down. We're gonna try and give a little bit of length on this. I'm gonna fold that down. So that is our pre-shape. We're gonna let this rest for 15-20 minutes. We're gonna do the final shape on this one. So I have the seam from the pre-shape is on the bottom at this point. I'm gonna flip it over so that we have the seam on top. And I'm gonna give it another fold down. Again, introducing some more tension in this direction to give that pan loaf a nice dome on top. And I'm gonna seal this similar to the way we did with the baguette to lock in all that tension that I've built. And then we will just roll it out. Once that's done, seam side down. I'm gonna go ahead and oil the pan lightly. This loaf is rather large, it's probably gonna take a bit to proof. We're gonna put this in, seam side down, give it a little bit of a dusting, and then just push that in there just to extend it out so that it's the whole shape of the pan. All right, here's our baked Pullman loaf. Perfect, so a nice even crumb. The interior is nice and moist still. Perfect for your picnic. This is what I would call a batter bread. Right here I have 100% rye. So rye has protein in it, has gluten in it, but not a type of gluten that's usable in building structure. So 100% rye is always going to be a little bit wetter. This one is basically going to be oiling a pan and scraping the batter into the pan. But there's really no shaping involved and no pre-shaping. So I'm going to go ahead and scrape this in. So this is about 2 kilos of 100% rye dough, and that'll be good for this Pullman here. It is yeasted, it's a sourdough bread, so it will rise, and we do need some room for that. So basically it's gonna go in like that. I'll wet my hands here, and we can just pat down this batter so that it rises evenly across the dough. And a nice way to finish this is with a little bit of rye flour. Just gives you like a nice crackly finish on the final loaf. All right, so here is a segment of our 100% rye Pullman. This bread's really nice, sliced thin in my opinion. It's a very full flavored bread. It's got a lot of sour to it. It's really great with butter because that fat kind of like works nicely with the sour on it. It's also really great with smoked fish, like smoked salmon, smoked trout. Again, the fattiness of those fishes plays really well with a sour bread like this. It's not really a shape on the focaccia. We're gonna olive oil a pan pretty liberally. So we're gonna take a very wet dough It's an 80% hydration white wheat dough. You can see why we're using a lot of olive oil here. And we're gonna just spread that on the pan. I'm gonna put a little bit on top also. We're gonna be spreading this gradually over the course of maybe an hour. So it's okay if the top's a little bit oiled. It'll be a lot easier to manage that way. So we're gonna just let this sit for about half an hour after it's got to the final shape. This has sat for maybe about an hour in total. I was spreading it every 15-20 minutes until it filled out the pan. Right before putting it in the oven, you can go ahead and finish this with some rosemary and some Maldon salt. Would be real nice. Here we have our finished focaccia. You can see that it got some nice golden color. It's still also very soft and flexible, so it has some nice moisture in it still. If you overcook this, it can get a little too crispy. So we're gonna go ahead and cut it open and see what the interior looks like. So you can see already, the interior looks really nice here. We got some nice open crumb structure. Perfect. Ciabatta is a really easy bread to shape. It's also going to be a really wet dough. So ciabatta actually means slipper in Italian. The final bread shape is kind of going to look like a very flat-footed slipper. So the final shape here, I'm going to dust the center a little bit, and we're just going to fold the dough over once, fold it over again. Now it's sitting on that seam I created, and that's basically it. Right before we go ahead and bake that, we're gonna flip that over. So what was the top side will become the bottom of the loaf, and that seam that we created could open in the oven a little bit and create a little bit of ridge, a little bit of texture on that bread, which not only looks nice, but also adds a nice component to the mouthfeel. So here we have our final baked ciabatta. It has a nice crust on it, so you can see evidence of the nice open whole crumb structure here. Got some nice characteristic ciabatta crunch there. Really nice, really light. Bread that goes with everything. Would be especially perfect dipped in some great olive oil. Next we're going to be shaping, or maybe more accurately cutting, English muffins. So English muffins are a yeasted dough as well. We're using a whole wheat dough here. You're going to take the English muffin dough and just give it a light roll out. You want it to be about, I don't know, ½ an inch thick. So we're gonna go ahead and let this dough rest for about 15-20 minutes. This dough is nice and relaxed. When we cut our circles using our ring mold, they're going to stay as circles. So we'll go ahead and cut. And we're gonna let these rest in this final cut shape on a sheet tray with a little bit of cornmeal. So the cornmeal both helps that English muffin not stick to the pan, and also it's going to give us a nice little texture on the bottom when we griddle them. So here we have our final English muffins. These have been griddled and finished in the oven. So you can see a little bit of cornmeal left on here. This is the surface that we proofed the English muffin. It sat on that cornmeal. Instead of using a knife to cut them, I like to split them with a fork. It gives you nice little nooks and crannies there that once you toast it will hold all that butter you're going to put on it. And then you'll open that up. You have a really nice open interior on that English muffin. So that's what we're looking for, all those little crooks and crags in there. Next we're going to make a fougasse, which is a really beautiful shape. We're going to be using a whole wheat dough for this. We're going to start with a triangular pre-shape, which is the first time we're going to see that, and pretty specific to this. We're just going to fold in the side here. We're going to fold in the other side. You can see the beginning of that triangle, and then real simply just fold up the bottom. So we have that in a triangle now. So we're going to let this rest for about 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to come back and roll it out. And then just really lightly roll this out. We don't want to eliminate all those air bubbles that we have in there from the fermentation. We want to keep this nice and light. We just want to get it into what will ultimately be our final fougasse shape. It's nice and relaxed. So we can go ahead and put this on a sheet tray. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it right down the middle. Spread so you can see that opening. It'll also give you some nice crust surfaces here. And then the rest of the design is really up to you. I'm just using a plastic bench scraper here You could use a credit card if you have one. You could use a knife too, just be careful you don't want to cut through the parchment underneath. And once you have those cuts, go ahead and spread those out. So you can see the pattern of cuts here. The dough is really nicely rested. If it hadn't been rested, that gluten structure kind of would have taken over and closed these holes right back up. It's really great to rip apart and use in dips. Also just eat on its own. The lavash that we're gonna make is a crispy lavash. It's essentially gonna be a cracker. We're gonna start with a whole wheat dough. We're gonna start by just rolling it out a little bit with a rolling pin. I wanna keep that nice and floured. Once we have it about here, I'm gonna go ahead and put it on the back of an oiled sheet tray. So this is gonna be our new spreading surface for this so that we can get it nice and thin. So I'm gonna oil that up, make sure the dough doesn't stick to it. Then we'll go ahead and throw that dough right on there. We're gonna let this rest for 15 to 20 minutes here. We're gonna go ahead and start to spread this out. So I'm just gonna very gently spread this. I'm spreading from the center so that we don't have a thick part in the middle and thin pieces around the edge. We wanna get this as even as possible. So keep spreading this around. Look like we're pretty much there. Don't worry about the little edge parts here. We're gonna go ahead and trim that. So it's been about 15 to 20 minutes that this lavash dough has rested in its final spreaded shape. We're gonna go ahead and trim the edges using a pizza cutter. You could use a knife for this. And this is not necessary. It's just gonna make it look a little bit cleaner, a little nicer, our final crackers. And this you can really cut into any shape you want. We can finish them with some seeds. I have some sesames here. And really just sprinkle them on. I'm gonna finish some with poppy as well. All right, so here we have our final baked crispy lavash. So go ahead, taste these. Perfect, great texture. They're perfect for dips. They're also great because they are baked crisp. So if you keep them in an airtight container, they'll last for weeks. Also pretty simple. We're gonna take a whole wheat dough and we're gonna roll this out pretty much to the length of the breadstick that we're looking for. This is all the same thickness. We're gonna let this rest in place so that when we cut our breadsticks, they don't spring back too much. All right, so we have our rested breadstick dough. We're gonna go ahead and cut these, get them ready for the bake. I'm just gonna use a pizza wheel here and we're gonna cut strips. We roll this out to about 1/4 inch. I'm gonna cut these at about 1/4 inch as well. So theoretically the cross section here is gonna be like a square. So we have our sheet tray here. I'm gonna take the breadsticks that we cut and just spread them out here. If there's some thick parts, you can kind of stretch those out a little bit. You can finish these with whatever you'd like. You can finish them with a little bit of salt. I'm gonna finish some with some poppy and some with sesame. Here we have our final breadsticks fresh out of the oven. They look really good. We got a nice even brown color on them. It's a credit to the shaping. We're gonna go ahead and give them a try. That's what you wanna hear when you break a breadstick. Perfect. Really great flavor. You can taste all the fermentation in them, but you still get a really great snap, really great crisp from the thin shape and the nice even bake. Pita is an easy bread to make. We're gonna start with a round pre-shape on this. We're using our 80% hydration white wheat dough. All right, so we have our round pita shape that has relaxed and we've spread it a little bit. It's relaxed for about 15 to 20 minutes just to make it a little easier to extend. So we're gonna go ahead and roll this out into its final pita shape. Pretty much that's what we're looking for. We just want about a 6-inch round on that. Here we have our pita out of the oven. You can see it's still pretty light. This is a really thin bread. You bake it a minute too long and you wind up having a cracker. So you can see here how thin it is and also that we do have a nice little pocket in there that separates out. So we're gonna taste this. It's got a nice pull to it, again, from the structure that we created in the shaping. Great. Ready for falafel. The next bread we're gonna shape is a pizza. You may have heard of it. It's another type of flatbread that you will find mostly in Italy and especially in New York. No shade to Chicago, but we're gonna start the pizza with a round pre-shape. So I have my piece of dough. I'm using about 500 grams of dough here. I am using a high hydration dough here, so a white wheat dough. We don't need to build a lot of strength in this because we're just going to be spreading it out. All right, so here's our round pre-shape of the pizza dough. We've let that rest for about 15 to 20 minutes. So first thing I'm going to do is just pat that down a little bit, get some of those larger air bubbles out, and then I'm going to start working that into a circle. You'll see in pizza shops a lot of the time they'll pick it up. This is just another way of spreading the dough in a nice even round and keeping a little rim on it there. We're going to go ahead and put that right on the pizza tray here. Today we're just going to finish ours with a little bit of rosemary. You could also brush this with some olive oil if you'd like. You can finish it with some salt. So once you have your toppings on the pizza, this can go right into the oven. All right, here we have our pizza out of the oven. We got some nice rise on this, so that looks really great. You have a nice open crumb structure on the crust part. We have some nice color going here on the bottom. It shows it's a really good bake. We'll give you a nice little crunch on that, and you'll have a nice chew on the crust, and you have a delicious pizza. So we looked at over 20 breads today, and while it might not be every bread, between the pre-shapes and final shapes, you now know how shape affects the structure, texture, and ultimately the taste of a bread.